All right, so let's go ahead and begin. So welcome everyone to week number 7. It's hard to believe that we are now more than halfway through the class. So this week we are focusing on American history. Once again, let me get this fixed up here, guys. Sorry. All right, sorry, guys. Okay. Well, trying to get the screen to work. All right, there we go. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. All right, so once again, we're here at week number 7, and we are talking about American history. So this week we are looking at the final history topic, and that is focusing on the 1900s and beyond. So again, the 1900s and beyond covers a little bit of the 2000s, but mostly focusing on the 1900s. And then we will also look at the section of the interview, the questions that involve equality and freedom. So let's go ahead and jump in. And let's begin by looking at the 1900s, and especially one of the first topics, World War I. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so we can see a little better. Okay. All right, now, once again, I'm going to do a little bit of reading, but then I'm going to ask you guys to help me out as well. So that's kind of how things work here. So we're going to be kind of doing a little bit of both, where I'm going to present some information and get you guys to help as well. Now, first off, in the 1900s, the United States participated in 5 wars, so quite a few. Now, the first war that we're going to talk about is World War I. World War I. Now, World War I was fought between 1914 and 1918. And again, many countries participated in this war. So, of course, it was not just the United States. It was Great Britain and France, Germany, Russia. Lots of different countries participated. But the United States did not join the war until 1917. So we were not participating in the war until the last 2 years or so. Now, during this time, Woodrow Wilson, everyone, let's say that name together. Woodrow Wilson. All right, very good. He was the president during World War I. In fact, there's his picture right there. So that's one of the questions that we'll be practicing with in just a moment. Okay? Now, speaking of Woodrow Wilson was president during the 1918 Spanish flu. So I don't know if you ever heard of the Spanish flu, but that was also a pandemic. In fact, it was a terrible pandemic in 1918. And some people think that maybe Woodrow Wilson died from the Spanish flu. So we don't really know, but it looks pretty likely that he did. But anyway, as you know, during the test, there are some holidays that we have to be able to identify. So one holiday, which is actually coming up next month, is Veterans Day. So Veterans Day was created after this war to recognize the people in the military who served during that time. So we remember all U.S. military veterans on Veterans Day. Okay, so that's our first war to talk about, World War I. And in this case, the United States participated for just a couple of years, and Woodrow Wilson was the president during that time. All right, let's move on to our next topic. Now, in the 1920s, so after World War I, the United States economy was pretty good. But at the end of the 1920s, some of you might remember, the economy crashed. And it crashed in many countries around the world. So beginning in the 1930s, the United States had some serious economic problems. So many banks were closed. People lost their jobs. In fact, at one point during this time, about 25% of people were unemployed. What does that mean, unemployed? Anybody know?
No job.
That's right. So, yeah, so right now, unemployment is pretty bad in the United States. But during this time in the 1930s, as much as 25% of people did not have a job. So as you can see, that was a terrible time in the United States and, of course, in other countries too. So this particular period of time has a special kind of name to it. We call this period the Great Depression. Everyone, let's say that together. The Great Depression. Now, in your countries, do you remember? I know it was a long time ago, but do you remember if your country had a Great Depression in the 1930s?
I'm not here yet.
Well, of course you weren't born then, Elaine.
I think, yeah, I think they have also depression, the Great Depression.
Yes. Yeah, pretty much all over the world. It was not just the United States. Now, some countries had economic problems before. For example, Russia, had economic problems before the 1930s. Germany, of course, had economic problems after World War I. But here in the United States, we had a good economy until the end of the 1920s. And then we had the Great Depression. Now, the Great Depression was a terrible time in the United States for economically. And during that time, they elected a president. His name, you can see his picture over here on the right. His name is Franklin Roosevelt. Okay, let's practice that name, everybody. Franklin Roosevelt.
Franklin Roosevelt.
Yeah, in fact, sometimes.
Roosevelt.
Yeah, Roosevelt. Now, of course, there were two Roosevelts who were president. So Franklin Roosevelt was the second. Theodore Roosevelt was the first. They were cousins. Okay, not brothers. They were cousins. And by the way, sometimes we call Franklin Roosevelt FDR. So I don't know if you've ever heard those letters before, but FDR means Franklin D. D stands for Delano Roosevelt. Now, he was elected president in 1933. So again, there's his picture over here on the right side. Maybe you've seen his picture before. But he tried to promise a better life for Americans. So he wanted to help the economy. And some people think maybe he helped it, maybe he didn't. The Great Depression lasted a long time. In fact, some people think the Depression lasted for 12 or 13 years, even though we had some ups and downs during that time. But during his time as president, he started many programs. So for example, he started many jobs programs. And he also started a program that you might be familiar with called Social Security. Do you guys know about Social Security? Have you heard of this before?
Social Security.
Yeah?
It's a card. There is a number on it.
That's right. That's right.
You can use it everywhere in the bank when you want to buy something. Yeah, or in the doctor they tell you if you have a Social Security.
Yeah, so it's kind of like our identification number, right?
Yeah.
It's a number that we have. So for example, everybody here in the group, when you apply to become a permanent resident of the United States, you must get a Social Security number. So that's important because we have to pay taxes, right? Paying taxes, nobody wants to pay taxes, but we have to pay taxes. So our Social Security is important because, yes, we use this Social Security insurance program to help pay us money when we retire. So keep in mind, some people retire at 62, 67. Some people retire at 70. For example, my father is finally retiring this year. He's 74, so he's been working a long time. So I keep telling my dad, I keep saying, Dad, you need to retire so you can start collecting Social Security. By the way, sometimes we call Social Security, the number, we call it SSN. Social Security number. And just remember, guys, don't give your Social Security number to strangers. Don't give your Social Security number on the internet. We need to use it in some ways, like Saba mentioned, to go to the bank, right, paying taxes. But be careful, that Social Security number is very important. Okay, now President Roosevelt, so there, let's continue. So he was president during this Great Depression. And again, some people think he helped people during the Great Depression. He created lots of programs. In fact, if you look at this photo here at the bottom, this picture here, this is a very famous picture. This picture was taken during the Great Depression. And this family here, you see this picture of this family, they were what we call migrant agricultural workers. So often migrants, not immigrants, but migrants. Migrants were people who often had to travel around to find work. They would work at different farms. So they didn't have their own farm. So as you can imagine, during the Great Depression, farming was terrible too. You know, so again, many people did not have food. Many people didn't have a way to make a living. This photograph, by the way, is a very famous picture to show what was happening during the Great Depression. And by the way, the photographer's name is Dorothea Lange. She was a very famous photographer, and I would recommend you should look at some of her other pictures. They're very, very good. And her pictures are often used to show us what the Great Depression looked like. So again, a very, very hard time in the United States. Okay. All right. Now, I want to get some people to help me here. So Saba, you get to read the next part here. So as we move from President Roosevelt during the Great Depression, now we're going to talk about World War II. So this was the Second War. And as you can see here, this picture here is of Pearl Harbor. This is when the Japanese raided the United States on December 7th, 1941. So this is a very famous day in American history. Now, it's not on the citizenship test. But first, let's read about the war, and then we're going to find out a little bit about this man here on the right side. All right, Saba, would you please read for us?
Okay. World War II was from 1939 to 1945. Roosevelt was president at the beginning of the war. The United States entered the war after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor,
which is in Hawaii, by the way. Yeah, that's in Hawaii. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The United States fought Japan, Germany, and Italy. Dwight D. Eisenhower.
This is a tough one. Let's try it. Eisenhower.
Yeah, Eisenhower was a famous general in the World War II. After the war, Eisenhower became a president.
All right, very good. Thank you, Saba. Now, once again, the World War II was from 1939 to 1945, but the United States did not enter the war until after 1941. And again, Pearl Harbor, which is the picture you see here of the bombing, Pearl Harbor is in Hawaii. So if you do get the chance to visit Hawaii, has anybody visited Hawaii before?
Not yet.
Not yet. Well, right now it's a little difficult to travel to Hawaii, but you know, if you get the chance, it's a pretty amazing place, and you can actually see one of the boats, one of the ships that was sunk during the war. So it's actually still there, and you can visit it. Well, anyway, Roosevelt was president at the beginning of the war. So Roosevelt actually served for a very, very long time. In fact, you might remember when we talked about the presidency, remember a couple of weeks ago, we said that presidents serve 4-year terms. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And the maximum number of years they can serve is 8.
8.
Yeah. Now, before this, though, so what happened was, before in the 1930s and 1940s, we did not have that constitutional amendment. So actually, presidents could serve for as long as they wanted to, as long as they were elected. So, for example, Roosevelt was president for 12 years.
Wow.
And in fact, it was because of Roosevelt's long administration that eventually we passed that amendment, the 24th Amendment. so that presidents could only serve 2 terms maximum. And one problem, of course, was because Roosevelt died when he was in office. So as you can see, if somebody serves too long, that could be a problem, especially if they're older. So that's why we have only this 8-year term now. Okay, so once again, the United States, there were 3 countries that the United States fought. It was Japan, Germany, and Italy. And then finally, one of the questions on the test is referring to this person we see here at the top. This is General Dwight D. Eisenhower. And again, Eisenhower was a general during World War II. In fact, he was probably one of the most famous. And he actually was very important in helping to win the war. After the war, so after Roosevelt died, there was another president. His name was Harry S. Truman. Then Truman eventually left, and Dwight D. Eisenhower became president. So later he became president. So just remember, everybody, Eisenhower was general during World War II. Okay, because that's one of the other questions we're going to see. All right, let's continue. Now, of course, there were other wars that the United States fought, and part of this was because during the war, during World War II, the United States and excuse me, the United States and Russia were actually working together during World War II. That might be a little, that might sound a little strange to you, but the truth is, the United States and Russia worked together. But after World War II, we began to get worried. Here in America, we began to get worried about communism. Everyone, let's say that word, communism.
Communism.
Yeah.
Communism.
Now, some countries, of course, still follow communism, but communism has kind of disappeared mostly today. But again, in the countries such as China, for example, Cuba, those places still are communist countries. But most of the communist countries now are kind of gone. Again, there are still a couple more. And then, of course, at the time, Russia changed into what we would call the Soviet Union. So again, when we say Russia, Russia and the Soviet Union are not the same thing. So today we have Russia, but in the past we had the Soviet Union. Okay, now let's learn a little bit about communism. So let's see, Olena, would you like to read the first part for us?
Okay. America fights communism. After World War II, communism was a main concern for the United States. There was conflict between the United States and the Soviet
Union.
Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
The 2 countries had different economies and systems of government. Both countries built stronger and bigger militaries. This period was called the Cold War. The Cold War ended in 1991.
Okay. So Elena, let's stop there just for a moment. Okay, thank you. So once again, let's go back and just review a couple of things. So again, after the war, communism was that big concern for the United States. And again, the Soviet Union, which sometimes you might see in history books called the USSR. And again, other countries were part of this, but most of the conflict was between the United States and the Soviet Union. And again, very, very different countries in terms of economies and different systems of government, but both were very powerful. So again, they started what was called the Cold War. Everyone, let's say that together. The Cold War.
Cold War. The Cold War.
Now, why do you think we called it the Cold War? Was it a war we fought in the wintertime? What do you think?
No, I think it's not like a war fighting with the weapons and with the people, but it's economic. I think it's an economic war.
Yes, yeah. The basic idea is we think of wars as like fighting and shooting and bombs, but during this time we actually did not have any of those particular things. Now, of course, we had, spies. Maybe you've seen spy movies, people like that. But for the most part, we did not have an actual like fighting war. Instead, it was this, like you said, this kind of economic or this kind of war in which we were kind of worried about the Soviet Union. But again, if you are familiar, if you remember, in 1991, and actually before that, in 1989, in Berlin, Germany, you might remember the Berlin Wall came down, which was, again, a sort of a symbol of this Cold War, of this communist regime. So again, I often have students who come from these former Soviet republics, right? So in this case, yes, that's what the Cold War was about. Okay, Elena, would you like to continue reading?
The United States was also concerned about communism in Korea and Vietnam. From 1950 to 1953, the United States fought in the Korean War. After the war, Korea divided into two countries. From 1959 to 1973, the United States fought in the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War ended in 1975.
All right, thank you so much, Elena. So once again, there are two more wars that we have listed here. We have the Korean War. Okay, so everyone, let's say that. Korean War.
Korean War.
Korean War.
Okay. And then we have the Vietnam War. Everyone, let's say that.
Nam War.
Vietnam War.
Nam War.
Vietnam War.
There you go, Gisela. Okay. Now, both of these wars, the problem here is both of these wars were very, very difficult and basically were not sort of success. They were not we didn't exactly win these particular wars. In fact, some people call the Korean War the Korean conflict because they don't know, because actually some people think Korea is still at war together, though they've made some progress. So again, we have North Korea and South Korea. So yes, the Korean War or the Korean conflict, again, very difficult. It was about 3 or 4 years long, and again, not very easy. And of course, what was even more difficult was the Vietnam War. The United States participated for quite a long time, and the war ended in 1975. But again, the United States did not win. We didn't have a treaty or a victory in either of these wars. So as you can see, these particular wars still are kind of a difficult topic to talk about in the United States. So again, thinking about communism, this particular topic is one that has a few questions on the test. So we will review those questions in just a moment. But I wanted to show you here at the bottom of the page. Remember I mentioned 1989. Well, there is the Berlin Wall. Does everyone see that wall there, the Berlin Wall?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And this particular structure you see here, this is called the Brandenburg Gate. Now, it is in Berlin. You can see it in Berlin. And the Berlin Wall at this time was basically dividing the two parts of Germany, the communist part of Germany and kind of the free part of Germany. So in 1989, they eventually opened this wall. This wall had been there for over 25, 26 years. So as you can see, people were very happy during that day. Do any of you remember this day or this time in 1989?
Yeah. Yes.
You remember this, Elaine?
Yes. I watch on TV news.
Yeah. Yeah, we watched it on TV here too. Now, I don't know, some of you might be too young, right?
I'm too young. I'm
Too
still
young. Okay. Elaine said she's still young. Okay. She thinks she's still young. All right.
Yeah.
Well, well, I don't know. I'm curious, Gisela, Elena, Saba, did you watch this on TV? Belisario, did you all see this on TV?
Yes, they repeat it. After that, they repeat it
Yes, I
sometimes when they made
Okay.
a documentary. They
Okay.
I watched it. Yes.
Okay. All right. Elena, you said you watched it too?
Yes, I watched too.
Okay. And Gisela, did you see it?
I watch some in TV, yeah,
Okay.
but I never be there.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know, Belisario, did you watch this on TV?
No.
No, you didn't. Okay. Maybe you were just a baby, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I remember I was in high school when I watched this on TV, so I didn't really understand it. Still, of course, now I understand it. But again, I just wanted to mention this because, again, I've had some students from East Germany and I've had some students from West Germany. And the students from East Germany, they said their life was very different. They were in the communist part, right? And the people from West Germany, their life was very different. Okay. All right. Okay, let's continue. And I think it's time to kind of finish our first topic, which is, again, talking about the 1900s. And of course, now we're getting into the 2000s. And there is one particular part, and I'm pretty sure everyone knows this one. So I'm going to zoom in here. Gisela, would you like to read this part for us? Are you able to read it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Recent military conflicts. In the 1990s, there was a conflict in the Middle East. There were problems between Iraq and Kuwait. In 1991, the United States fought against Iraq in the Gulf War. On September 11, 2001, terrorists attacked the United States. There were attacks in New York City, Pennsylvania, and Arlington, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
Almost 3,000 people died that day. After that, the United States started a war against terrorists.
Okay. Thank you, Gisela.
You're welcome.
So once again, so here's our final sort of military conflict, and that is the Gulf War. So everyone, let's say that together, the Gulf War.
Go for
The Gulf War.
Go for.
Yeah, now the Gulf War was very short. It really only lasted just a few months. And again, it was a very kind of successful war, but the problem is it probably helped contribute. It probably helped kind of lead to the terrorist situation that we faced in the United States in the early 2000s. Now, I think everyone probably remembers September 11th. I remember on that day I was teaching English. I was in English class.
Yeah.
And my boss came into the classroom and said, someone is attacking America. Someone is attacking New York City. So we turned on the TV. We had an old television in our room. We didn't have satellite, didn't have cable. So we could see, it was difficult to see on the screen, but we could watch, we saw the second plane hit the World Trade Center just as we turned on the television. So it was a pretty shocking day. So yes. So again, in the interview, there is a question about what happened on September 11th. And basically the answer there is terrorists attacked the United States. And again, there were 3 locations. Now, I don't know if you've been to New York City recently, but you can go down to Ground Zero and see where the location is. In Pennsylvania, they have a particular monument that you can see in Pennsylvania. And then Arlington, Virginia is where the Pentagon or the military building is located. So again, yes, 3 different places that were attacked that day. And notice at the bottom it says the United States started a war against terrorism. And of course, the problem is that war has been going on a very long time. And some people hope that maybe it's over. Some people hope that, but it's still a very difficult situation. So again, if you see this picture here, this was the one in Arlington, Virginia. This was in the Pentagon, which is the military building that we have. Okay? All right. Okay, guys, now I'm going to return to our presentation just for a moment. So that particular part of the topic is, in terms of the history portion, we are now finished with all of the questions relating to American history. So now let's review those questions as they put them on the test, okay? All right, so once again, guys, remember there were many wars in the United States in the 1900s. Can you name one war that was fought in the 1900s? Who can tell me the name of one war we fought?
Gulf,
Anybody?
Gulf War.
The Gulf War. Okay, that's one. Can somebody tell me another one? Hello. Anybody?
The Vietnam War,
The Vietnam War. Good. All right,
the Gulf,
Elena.
the Gulf War,
Gisela, can you tell me another one?
Korean War,
The Korean War. Good. Gisela, can you tell me another one?
I don't remember.
Oh, we had two big ones right at the beginning of the 1900s.
the World War the First
So World War One
and one,
and
and the World
and
War Two, second.
yeah, that's right. World War yeah. Now, Elena, you said the second. You'll notice that I say World War Two. So for some reason we don't use first and second, even though some people say the First World War and some people say the Second World War. Most Americans use the numbers. So in this case, there you go. All right. Well, let's take a look at them one more time. So World War One, World War Two, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and some people refer to it as the Persian Gulf War. Now remember, you just need one. You just need one. Okay. So in this case, you could say any of those. All right. We had lots of names in this particular section. Who can remember the name of the president during World War One? Anybody?
It's not.
It's not.
Roosevelt,
Oh, you're close, Elena. That was World War II.
Wilson.
Wilson. Congratulations, Belisario. Woodrow Wilson. And again, remember I mentioned it's possible that Woodrow Wilson died from the Spanish flu in 1918. So that might also help you remember his name a little better. Okay, let's continue. All right, now I think we can answer this one now. Who was president during the Great Depression and World War II?
It's
Very
how?
difficult.
Franklin Roosevelt.
Aha, Olena. Olena got it first. All right, congratulations, Olena. It is Roosevelt. Yes, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Now, guys, I told you there are a lot of names in the in the citizenship test. Okay. Oops. Well, sorry, guys. I was going to hide the answers. I don't know why I didn't. Let's see if I can try that again. Sorry, I thought I had it set up. Well, I already answered the question. All right, so the United States fought Italy, Japan, and Germany. Sorry, guys, I thought the question. I'm going to fix that one for the next time. All right. Okay, let's get to question number 5. So before he was president, Eisenhower was a general. What war was he in?
World War Second.
Or two?
World War II. Yes, you're right, Elaine, but remember, call it World War II.
World War.
And by the way, there's a picture of him talking to the military troops. But yes, during World War II. Okay, now during the Cold War, remember we mentioned the Cold War, what was the main concern of the United States? So what were they fighting? What were they against in the Cold War?
Communism.
Yes, very good. Communism. Yes. And by the way, the flag that you see there, that's the flag of the Soviet Union. So again, the Soviet Union does not exist anymore, but that was their flag during that time. And of course, we said before, there are still some countries that are communist today.
Yes.
Okay. All right. What major event happened on September 11th, 2001 in the United States? Everyone should know the answer to this one.
The Paris
Attack.
attack.
That's right.
Paris
Terrorists.
Terrorist attack.
Terrorist attack.
attack.
Yes. Yeah, so terrorists attacked America, the United States. And in fact, if you see this picture here are the pillars of light that they show every September 11th. That's where the Twin Towers used to be, the two buildings for the World Trade Center. Now, of course, they have the new World Trade Center located there.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, guys. Now we're heading into our final historical topic. This one is not, of course, referring just to the 1900s. This one's under the topic of equality and freedom. Everyone, let's say those two words: equality
Equality,
Equality
freedom.
and
Equality
freedom.
and freedom.
and freedom. Yes, very good. Now, of course, it's difficult to have freedom if we don't have equality, especially equality before the law. So when we think about history, we often think of a couple of important moments or movements in our history. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in and start here and kind of read a little bit and talking about people who were fighting for our rights. So as we said before, you might remember many weeks ago, we talked about the Declaration of Independence. You remember the Declaration of Independence? Yes? Do you remember that? Kind of. Do you remember in the Declaration of Independence, we mentioned three rights?
Parts, yeah.
What were the three rights?
The speech.
No, that's the Constitution.
Oh.
Let's think about the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration was before that. So we mentioned there are three things that all Americans should have. Do you remember? Anybody remember?
With the
Freedom.
people.
Say it again. Say it again, Elena.
With the people.
That's the Constitution.
Um,
So in the Declaration of Independence. Okay, I'll get you started. So we said life.
Freedom.
Yeah, freedom, liberty.
liberty.
Speech.
No,
No. Oh.
that's the Constitution. Life, liberty,
Happiness.
and the
Happiness.
congratulations. Yes, congratulations, Elena. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So those three things, again, right at the beginning of our country, we thought these three things are so important. So freedom and those rights to freedom and happiness, we thought were so important. But, okay, now remember, we talked about this before, but not everyone had those freedoms, right? Remember that? We talked about that in the beginning when they said all men, right, are created equal. Well, again, they didn't mean everybody. Yeah, so the problem was that our history, of course, is not perfect, but it does show that we always have tried. We've tried. It's not been easy, but we've tried to get more and more freedom for more and more people. For example, if you remember, we talked about in the Civil War, we had slavery. Well, that meant that those people were not free. They did not have those rights. So after the Civil War was finished, many African Americans still had a lot of discrimination. They still had a lot of problems. So again, after the Civil War, they did not have schools, jobs, or even housing as other Americans had. Now, this is true, guys. For many years in the late 1800s and, of course, in the early to kind of 1930s, 1940s, African Americans in some places were kind of separated from people. And as you can see, that was not very fair. African Americans often had to go to different schools, had to use different public bathrooms, drink from different public fountains, ride in different places on the bus. As you can see, that was a terrible time, and we did not give a lot of freedom to those groups. Of course, a group that we've talked about before in other classes were women. Unfortunately, in the United States, women did not have equal rights for a very long time. In fact, women in the beginning really couldn't have any property, couldn't own any houses, right? Could really not work or make any money. So again, these people did not have the right. For example, women for many years did not have the right to vote. So as you can see, in the United States, we have had a difficult history. It's not been easy, but we have tried. We have tried to continue to give these rights to other people. So voting, for example, education, and of course, being treated equally are what we call civil rights. That life, liberty, Those things, we call them civil rights. Everyone, let's say that together. Civil rights.
Civil right.
Right.
Civil right.
Civil right.
Right.
Now, for example, in your countries, let's think about your countries right now. Okay, so who can vote in your countries? Can everyone vote in your countries?
Yeah, everybody.
Now, yes,
Yes.
everybody.
Yeah, now. Oh, you said now. So Saba, what was different in the past?
Before, no. Before, I think women, they can't vote. They have no rights. But after, I think, 1956, I think they become, they have their rights.
Mm-hmm.
Women.
Yeah. So
And
as you
for
go ahead.
children, for children after 18, it's 18.
Okay. Well, as you can see, again, yes, the truth is, all over the world, we've had situations where people have not always had civil rights. So keep in mind that, the United States was often, first in some of these ways, but often in some situations they were not. So these civil rights people needed to fight for in the United States. So especially when we think about women and when we think about African Americans. So there were several social movements for civil rights in this country, several of them. And it's a very interesting history to study about. But two groups that we're going to be focusing on here were led by two people, Susan B. Anthony and Martin Luther King Jr. Everyone, let's say the first name together, Susan B. Anthony.
Susan B. Anthony.
Now, Saba should remember Susan B. Anthony, right?
Yes,
Saba?
yes,
Yes.
yes.
Because we talked about Susan B. Anthony in one of my other classes. Okay, let's mention the second name now. Let's say the second name together. Martin Luther King Jr. Everyone, let's say that.
Martin
Martin Luther
Luther
Jr.
King Jr. Yeah. Does everybody know Martin Luther King?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, most of my students are familiar with Martin Luther King
Famous.
Jr. Yeah, very famous. Now, I want to be clear, even though these are the two names that we have to think about in the interview, Susan B. Anthony and Martin Luther King Jr. were only a part of these civil rights movements. We think of them because they often gave speeches or they were people who were, very dynamic or, could present themselves to the public. But I want to be clear that there were hundreds and thousands of women, especially, excuse me, with Martin Luther King Jr., with civil rights for African Americans. Many of the first people who started these civil rights fights were actually just, were actually just housewives, young men, young women. So it was not just Martin Luther King Jr. There were lots of leaders in these movements. And the same thing with Susan B. Anthony. Saba will remember, we talked about some of the other leaders in the women's rights movements too, right? Saba, do you remember any other names of the civil rights women?
Not.
No, not right now.
No.
Yeah, there were lots of women. For example, Elizabeth Cady Stanton was one name, but there were a lot of women too. But Susan B. Anthony kind of gets to be the most well known. So if you look here over on the left side, they're focusing on New York. These are women who wanted to vote. So you see that picture there, right? That was a long time ago. And if you look over here on the right side, if you remember what I mentioned with African Americans, notice that he is drinking from a public fountain. This is in Oklahoma City. Notice it says colored, which at the time was a name to refer to African Americans. Now, of course, we do not use that word today. Most people don't like that word. But in the 1930s, you would have, a place for white people. So if you look in the background here, they would mention to separate or to segregate white men and African American men and so on. So yes, this was a part of our history, and it's not a nice part of our history, but we hope that we will continue to be better. But as you probably saw in the summertime, we still have lots of problems. We still have a long way to go. So we hope that we can, fix these problems in the future. But it's not going to be easy. We've had a very long history of these things. Okay, so again, it's very difficult for some people to talk about these topics. But the truth is, the United States, we believe in civil rights, but unfortunately, we don't always agree. So that's something I just want to mention here because that is talking about today. Now, for example, let's zoom in a little bit and let's talk a little bit about Susan B. Anthony. So, Elaine, would you like to read for us about Susan B. Anthony? Can you read that for us?
Susan B. Anthony fought for women's rights and civil rights. She won equal education and voting rights for women and African women, or African American people.
Good.
She organized
Good.
conventions and protests.
Protest. Good.
Protest. She made speech and published a newspaper about women's rights. She asked members of Congress to change the laws about voting. Susan B. Anthony died in 1906.
We would say 1906.
1906. In 1920, women got the right to vote.
Yeah, so thank you, Elaine. And so I want to point out, guys, 1920. So 1920 is when women got the right to vote. So what is so important about this year? Think, everybody. What year is it?
The World War One.
Okay, you're thinking too historically, Saba. No, this is 2020, right? So come on, Saba. Why is this year so important? You know the answer, Saba. It's 100 years. Yes.
Yes.
100
This is the 100th.
making my microphone off. That's why.
Yeah, you were thinking too much. Of course, 1906 was a little before World War One, but as you can see, Susan B. Anthony, unfortunately, she died before women got the right to vote. But again, she organized. She really fought for women and their right to vote. So again, here's a picture of her. This is an old picture, as you can see, when she was older. Yeah. But over here on the left side, we can see these women protesting women's rights for votes. Again, they were very, very well organized. They wanted to give equal pay, equal representation. It was a very, very difficult fight. They fought and fought and fought. And by the way, I just wanted to share with you very quickly that when she organized these conventions, the name of the most famous convention was called Seneca Falls, which is in New York. Now, everybody, I got the chance to see, I passed by the sign for Seneca Falls on the road. So I took a picture of it. So I'll have to send you a picture. But this is where the women's rights movement kind of began, was here at this place called Seneca Falls. So it was in New York. So anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting. But once again, Susan B. Anthony fought for women's rights and civil rights. All right, everybody. Now, our final topic, our final person to talk about is Martin Luther King Jr. Now, again, most people know who Martin Luther King Jr. is. Again, he was kind of leading that civil rights movement for African Americans. So I'm going to read this last part just to kind of highlight a couple of things. So again, Dr. King was a Baptist minister, so he was a religious person. He was from Atlanta, Georgia. And again, as I told you before, he was a very important leader of the civil rights movement, but he was not the only leader. Sometimes we forget, people know Martin Luther King Jr., but they don't remember other people. But in this case, again, he was probably the most well-known. Now, the civil rights movement tried to end this racial discrimination. Everyone, let's say that together. Racial discrimination.
Racial discrimination.
Yes, and one example of that was what we called segregation. Everyone, let's say that word, segregation.
Segregation.
Now, segregation is a little bit different from separation. To separate, for example, we often separate for many reasons. But segregation was actually what the government did. The government would create laws and they would separate, African Americans and white people. So this was called segregation because what it did is it created other schools. It made people go to different restaurants, buses, many public places where African Americans were either prohibited, they were prevented, or they had to have separate facilities. Now, again, the United States was not the only country to have segregation. Some of you might remember South Africa. South Africa had segregation as well. And other times in the history of the world, we had segregation as well. But the United States practiced it for a very long time. So the problem was Dr. King, he said, he helped organize marches, he gave speeches, and probably the speech that everybody is familiar with. Maybe you've heard of this name, his famous speech, I Have a Dream. Have you heard of this before? Have you heard the name of the speech before? The I Have a Dream speech?
Yes, yes. It's Martin Luther King is famous about this phrase. It
Yes.
said, "I have a dream."
Yeah, now some people kind of misunderstand what the speech is about. But basically, the basic idea of the speech is he has a dream that everyone in America will be treated equally. But it's not necessarily just a dream. He wants it to be reality. So he's trying to tell people, that Declaration of Independence. Remember that Declaration of Independence? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In that speech, he tells everyone that those three rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, needs to be for everybody, not just for white people. So again, this dream that he had was a vision of the future in America. And of course, we have made a lot of progress towards that dream, but of course, we still have a long way to go in making that happen. Unfortunately, on April 4th, 1968, he was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. He was killed. Now, you can go to Memphis, Tennessee, and there is a very famous museum there. If you get a chance to go, it's probably one of the best museums I've ever seen. It's called the Civil Rights Museum. It's located in Tennessee. So I would recommend, if you get a chance, go visit the museum. It's actually at the hotel where Martin Luther King was killed. So you can actually kind of see the hotel. You can learn a lot about the history of the civil rights movement. And guys, even here in Cincinnati, we have a civil rights kind of museum in downtown Cincinnati. It's called the Freedom Center. So if you get a chance, if things open up and you get a chance to go, I would really recommend visiting the Freedom Center. The Freedom Center is in downtown Cincinnati. So please, I would recommend. So I'll send you a link in our email about the Freedom Center if you would like to visit it. I would really recommend it. Finally, we do have a holiday now that we observe for Martin Luther King. It's in January. So Martin Luther King Jr. Day is in January. So not a great month. It's pretty cold, but it is the month we celebrate his holiday. And if you notice here in the pictures, these are people protesting, marching for those rights. Notice it says they want to integrate schools, right? Don't segregate, don't separate, bring them together. And there's a picture of Martin Luther King Jr. on the right side. Okay, guys, our time is getting away from us, so let's return to our presentation. And now let's review our final set of questions. Okay, guys, here's number one. What did Susan B. Anthony do?
Women can vote.
Okay, so she fought for women's voting rights, yeah.
Voting, yeah, voting.
Yeah, so fought for women's rights, or we could even say she fought for civil rights. So you're correct, Elaine. She wanted to fight for women's voting. Okay, all right, number two, what movement tried to end racial discrimination? What did we call that movement?
It's great.
Yeah, keep going.
Segregation.
No, that was an example of racial discrimination. I'll give you a hint. It's the first part is two words. We learned these two words a moment ago. All right, well, let's give the answer. I'm sure you understand it now. The civil rights movement. So this movement tried to end racial discrimination. And again, there's a picture there of Martin Luther King Jr. marching. This was the Jobs March in Washington, D.C. Okay. All right, number 3. What did Martin Luther King Jr. do? What could we say about Martin Luther King Jr.? What did he do? What did he fight for?
For freedom, and to execute that African American have to be like the white people.
Okay. All right.
Have,
So
free happiness and life and.
Okay. So Saba, you're kind of going in the right direction. Gisela, can you help us here?
He organized marches.
Okay. So organized marches. So what kind of marches? What will we call these marches? We just learned it. What kind of movement? The civil
Rights.
There we go. Yeah, he fought for civil rights. So the civil rights movement. So yeah, everybody, you did a good job explaining it, but on the test, I think they really want to hear those words, civil rights. Okay, so everyone, let's say those 2 words again, civil rights.
Civil rights.
Civil rights.
Now, Saba, you mentioned African Americans and whites. So the word I think you're looking for is equality. Everyone, let's say that word again, equality.
Equality.
Yes. Yeah, so basically he worked for the equality of all Americans. Now, guys, these last parts here, we got to practice those, right? Civil rights, equality, that's what we have to do. Okay. Once again, guys, I was going to do the reading and writing practice from last week, but we had such an interesting discussion, we don't have enough time to do it. So again, don't worry, we will have time next week. So let's go ahead and kind of jump ahead. I'm going to jump ahead from here. All right, so this week in your email, I'm going to send you the flashcard practice for the topics we discussed today. So for the kind of American history of the 1900s and the 2000s. And that will include the equality and freedom discussion that we had as well. Now, guys, you have to practice, okay? So please, please, please make sure you're practicing with those flashcards. Okay, now, before we continue, I want to remind everybody that next week will be the final week for the 100 questions discussion. So please, please, please try to make sure you're going to attend next week, because what we're going to do is we're going to finish with our final kind of discussion, and then we're going to do some practice. So everybody, make sure you're practicing with those questions. Make sure you're reviewing those questions. And we're also going to have the chance to try some reading and writing practice. So please make sure you're practicing those things at home as well. All right, guys, our time is up for today, but do I have any questions?
No.
Any questions?
No.
Okay, I'm going to count. 3,
No, I'm good.
2. Okay. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to put the sign-in link in the
Question.
chat. Okay, Belisario.
For homework, I'm not putting in computer. I'm writing a book.
These are
It's okay?
yeah, these are the homework that we're going to do is just practicing on the computer. So I will send you a link, Belisario. I'll show you what it looks like. Let me show you, everybody. Let me show you what it looks like. So each week, Belisario, I send the students a link for flashcards. So in your email, you'll get these flashcards that you can practice. Now, this one's a little small, and you can also click on the audio to listen to it. But for example, this first flashcard says, I don't know if you can see that. It says, name one war fought by the United States in the 1900s. And then to practice with the flashcard, you just click on the flashcard, and it gives you the answer. I don't know, could you hear that? Could anybody hear that?
No, I can't
Okay.
hear that.
Yeah, I didn't have it switched to audio, but you can actually listen to the cards too. And then Belisario, the idea is you can practice with all of these cards at home. Okay? So Yeah. Now, Belisario, have you been going and looking at the video page where I put all the videos? Have you been watching the other videos? Okay, and have you been practicing with there are links there on the page. Here, let me show you. So everybody, I don't know if you know, again, if you remember that we put so here on our main website, we have a citizenship website. Okay? And then over here on the left side it says Kenton ESL citizenship page. Okay? Sorry, it's a little slow. I'm not sure why it's not going anywhere. There we go. Okay, so this is our page. And again, on the page, I post all the videos. So week 1, week 2. But do you notice, Belisario, all these links that I have here? So these are the links that you can click on and practice with.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so week 6 was last week, so you can go back and review that. And then I will post week 7 when it's finished.
Okay.
Okay? All right, and again, I usually send it to you in your email too.
Okay.
Okay, now, guys, in the chat box, let me go ahead and put the sign-in form. So I think at this point, everyone knows how to sign in. So I think, Belisario, I think you signed in the last class. All right, guys, well, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week, okay?